Welcome back, everybody. It is Matt and the Working Brother back at you for another talk. This is going to be the second part of this talk with Matt. He has graced us with more time than we were expecting. So we got a little casual in the first where we got to know him well. Matt, welcome back. How you doing?
Yeah, long time no see. I'm doing okay.
I know.
Yeah.
For people, it might be a day, or they might also have found this somewhere else on the channel. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe. I didn't even say that in the last video. And check out the Patreon if you like what the Working Brother does. So, Matt, last time we talked about all kinds of things. You told us the many hats that you wear. One of them is the Strategic Culture Foundation, and you also mentioned that you, I believe, write for globalresearch.ca. Is that correct?
Yeah. The Strategic Culture Foundation, unfortunately, has been sanctioned by the Canadian government as of January or February. So, unfortunately, that wonderful outlet is not something that I can write for at the moment, at least at this moment in history where things are a little bit hot.
What do you mean sanctioned by the government? What does that mean?
Well, the U.S. government had already put Strategic Culture Foundation on their, Russian misinformation enemies list. So any American author who chose to write for Strategic after the sanctions by the U.S. State Department were threatened with getting something like a $300,000 fine, and it was messy. So that cut off a big chunk of the American writing roster. The Canadians somehow were not hit by that until January or February, where something similar was done by the the Canadian government. So that's an unfortunate thing.
And
there's still, it's still a wonderful website.
Is it wild of me to guess that it was done using the same legislation that was brought in for the COVID truckers banking seizures?
It seems like it might have been different, but
yeah,
I didn't really spend the time to dig into that cesspool. It's yeah. But the IMF says that we're the happiest. We're amongst the happiest nations of the world, and we're the most democratic on their.
And you're sorry about it.
Democracy and happiness indices.
and you're sorry about it. The reason that I bring up global research is going back many years. It's been one of the only places that you can get, let's say, facts about the breakup of Yugoslavia and stuff like Srebrenica, quote unquote, massacre and stuff like that. And being a Serb and coming from being born in Yugoslavia originally, it is close to my heart knowing that, there are still places on the internet where you can find actual facts about events. And I encourage anyone who's looking looking for details about any event, including stuff like Bucha, to look up globalresearch.ca.
Yes, absolutely. No, Michel Chossudovsky has done an amazing job over the years keeping this sort of island of sanity afloat. And even though it's almost impossible, it's really been censored out of most Google searches. People should just make this part of their intellectual daily diet, is just go to that website and just do an overview, and you'll have an edge over what 99.9% of your North American fellow citizens think about the world.
And if nothing else, it is listed up here as a Kremlin amplifier, so that's got to mean something. I don't know if you've come across this graphic from Mi Bureau, which is Microsoft's anti-Russian. Let me zoom that in a bit. It's Microsoft's anti-Russian propaganda thing. And even Zero Hedge is on there, and stuff like the Duran and Global Research. But then there's South Front and all the Russian outlets as well. But it's a very interesting graphic, and I was just it was hilarious to see Zero Hedge and Global Research on there with some of these other things. This was put out by the Austrian military in one of their presentations. I don't know if you've run into that Austrian colonel guy. Have you seen him online?
No, probably. I'd probably recognize him if I heard a video or something.
Let me play you a little excerpt. You should be able to hear it. Let's see. He calls him a general, but he's actually a colonel.
Die Waffenlieferungen an die Ukraine, ja, das ist wunderbar. Aber wie schaut das aus mit dem Personal? Wer besetzt alles diese Panzer? Ja? Kann die Ukraine da das Personal stellen oder wird es doch so sein, dass NATO-Soldaten dann das praktisch bedienen müssen? Man spricht davon, dass Polen schon 20.000 Soldaten in der Ukraine stationiert hat.
Sie brauchen keine NATO-Soldaten in die Ukraine schicken. Ich ziehe meine Uniform aus, unterschreibe einen Vertrag und gehe in die Ukraine. Ich bin kein Angehöriger der österreichischen Streitkräfte mehr, sondern Vertragsbediensteter.
So this is the head of military intelligence in Austria, if I'm not mistaken, or the head of one of their military universities. And in this,
you're gonna have to tell me what he said, because the thumbnail was so small that I couldn't even read the caption.
He gets asked if we're sending all these NATO tanks to Ukraine. Who's gonna man these tanks? Because the Ukrainians can't man them. Are we gonna send Austrian and other NATO troops? And the colonel comes back and says, if I am a NATO officer and I take off my uniform and I sign a contract with the Ukrainian army, then I'm not a NATO officer anymore. What is your take on this clown show army? I don't know even what to call it. Like this whole playing makeup and dress up and all these mercenaries or volunteers or freedom fighters or protectors of democracy.
There's this graphic that somebody had sent around on social media. They took a picture of a New York train station where there was an advertisement featuring somebody asleep, a homeless person basically, who's obviously had their ass kicked by the economy, asleep on a bench, saying, "Are you looking for a change in your life? Are you looking for a regular paycheck and hot meals? Join the Ukrainian Legion." It was like a recruitment ad in New York. I mean, the level of desperation here to find human cannon fodder, it's really wild, to the point that you have people with actual fighting experience, people who are just bureaucrats being encouraged to join. Like this guy. I mean, I don't think that this guy himself would actually walk the walk or allow his kids to do it. But you do have a lot of foreign mercenaries with or without experience being sent in. Some of them are just shell-shocked people who are so traumatized in their experience in the Middle East fighting for the U.S. military industrial complex in Afghanistan, and now don't know how to live their lives because they just, were wrecked people. They need to be in war in order to be themselves. So that's an opportunity. You have that sort of therapeutic type of sickness fulfilling some of the identities of those jumping into the fire. But you have a lot leaving too, right? Like there's some crazy statistics of foreign mercenaries who've joined from France, and the rates of people from these foreign mercenary groups who immediately get sent into a hot zone, realize that they're so under-equipped to deal with the Russian military that they just quit and run back to their homelands in whatever part of Europe. It's a very high rate of quitting, very high rate of death as well, as we've also been following, and it's. I usually avoid getting into the cesspool of of analyzing Ukraine, because it's just so insane. The day-to-day decisions made tactically by the handlers of Kiev. I personally am of the view that the oligarchy is a form of smart stupid. Like there's a sort of brilliance to their ability to manage systems of auxiliaries on higher and lower levels of management down a chain of command. But the problem is that they've created a system over the course of many, many decades, which is a system that is premised on the principle of decay, kind of like what I was mentioning about what I discussed about the sickness of my fine arts program in university 20 years ago. Is like the whole philosophy was rooted in decay, and there's like only so far that ideal can take you in the practical world before you deconstruct reality to the point that there's nothing left to work with. So a lot of those auxiliaries that they require to manage machinery like NATO, like Canada, look at the intellect of Chrystia Freeland or Justin, or look at the intellect of Kamala Harris or even Blinken, some of the Rhodes Scholars, smartest guys in the room like Sullivan or Susan Rice. They're ignorant, dumb people who believe their own garbage. They put out propaganda and they believe their propaganda. Even mafia crime lords who sell drugs don't consume their own product, or they shouldn't. They know that that's bad business. These guys consume their own dope. So that makes them sloppy, stupid. I do think that they probably believed that their economic warfare of sanctions and other things would crush the Russian economy by now easily, or at the very least induce such a crisis economically that it would be favorable to a coup d'etat run by certain traders in the Russian fifth column, networks that have still remained to stay behinds, kind of like in Gladio, the same thing. Yeah. There's Russian traders and stay behinds who are expected to, overthrow Putin and install a more friendly regime in Russia that would let go of its ambitions to work with China and Iran and challenge the rules-based order. None of that happened. So I think that there's sort of there's signs of infighting within the oligarchy themselves, and I think that that's an interesting thing that I try to pay attention to. Is
you mean the oligarchy in within Russia?
Oh no, I'm sorry. There's signs of fighting. Yeah, there too. That's true. But I was more referring to the higher oligarchy, because the Russian oligarchy, as far as I see them, it's sort of like nouveau riche, local fools with money who are deployed like robots. But what I mean is like the higher ups who made those happen. And what I think you're seeing is a replay of the sort of thing we saw in the 1930s. Because what was the 1930s? The 1930s was, okay, we're going to get a new world order, post-nation state order where we're going to have a proto-transhumanist, then it was called simply eugenics, religion for the elite that would then manage a depopulated world with certain regions that would be under the control of the Japanese, the Germans as slave colonies, with very specific breeding protocols.
Sounds like conspiracy theories to me, man.
That was people need to read Mein Kampf for like that. That's
or like
sort of what they
any
wanted
book,
to do.
Basically. Yeah.
Any book which takes reality into consideration. This is not So that failed. Why did it fail? Because at a certain point the German machine built up with the support of the Bank of International Settlements. Without the support of Prescott Bush, Brown Brothers Harriman Banking Corporation, the JP Morgan trusts. If you didn't have a lot of these things, the City of London financiers, without their support and logistic and financial and ideological backing, because even eugenics was brought to Germany by the Rockefeller Foundation, which was funding the research first that was creating sterilization policies into law in 30 U.S. states before 1933 that Hitler used to model his eugenics legislation on. Also in Canada, in Alberta, BC, we were sterilizing the unfit.
Yeah.
So why did that not work? Why did they sabotage it? Well, at a certain point, Hitler realized that he could be the senior partner in the arrangement. He listened to his generals who were like, "No, don't follow your original mandate to just go attack Russia directly after Poland. Try to secure your southern perimeter first and then go north." That basically gave, and Hitler was at least smart enough to listen to his generals in that sense and not just go straight on into Russia right away. So Barbarossa was kicked down that can was kicked down the lane for a little while. But you had within the British governing class of hereditary power, a Nazi king, you had a Nazi prime minister, a few people who had the ambition. Lloyd George was a hyper pro-Nazi wannabe prime minister in the 30s, who had already been prime minister during World War I. Lloyd George, Neville Chamberlain as well, pro-Nazi. A lot of these guys represented a big chunk of the governing ancient hereditary structures that were like, okay, well, let's just accept Hitler's conditions and we'll be the junior partner, whatever. Maybe, you know, a few decades down the line, we'll get back and be the senior partner again. But, you know, let's just play along with the new rules. And you know, the King Edward the Eighth was even writing from his exile in Portugal, because he was basically, you know, told to step down during this little infighting within the British governing class. And they created a bit of a scandal around him wanting to marry some American fascist debutante, Simpson. And but he was still writing letters to Hitler, as we now know, all the way up until 1940-41, after Britain was in the war, saying, hey, look, just, you know, keep on bombing those civilian centers. You'll break those Brits sooner than later, I promise you. And I'll be reinstalled as your Nazi king, I promise. He wanted it, and he wasn't alone. So I mean, what I guess what I'm trying to get across is that the empire is quite good at planning. They're good ivory tower, sophisticated planners, and they like the subterfuge of Byzantine conspiracies. They're pretty good at that craft that they honed over thousands of years, I would say. Yep. They're using all of the arts of psychological warfare that have been ongoing for a long time, so that they like the game. But when it comes to execution, that's where they tend to mess up repeatedly. They messed up in World War II. It didn't go according to what they thought it was going to be, and they had to like backstab each other, fight each other. And today we have the same thing, where you have, you know, certain factions of the governing class who represent or who have selected certain agencies or agents, like Jeffrey Sachs, for example, to be a voice of abort, you know, like, let's abort this. Let's use a different policy of more patience, of reason. Let's try to put out the fire. Let's try to change trajectory, because they've put this giant machine into motion. And it's really hard to change course, you know, from all of the propaganda that they've built up. So you have Jeffrey Sachs. You got a few others who are like deployed to try to change course, to see if it's possible to abort, because they could see that they're blowing themselves up much faster. Actually, I was going to say much faster than they're blowing Russia up, but no, Russia's actually not blowing up at all. We're seeing more integration and collaboration with India, settling trade deals with rupees and ruples, with China, you know, who's making up for the lost energy market. Same thing for Saudi Arabia.
What I'm hearing from you in the background, basically, what you're saying is this is great Albion's great game of hemming in Russia and the heartland versus the rimland, and Mackinder's theories, which we've discussed with one of our guests in really, really detailed fashion. So we'll leave a playlist somewhere here. But I just wanted to bring that up in the sense that you've been to Japan recently, and Japan had those, you know, 2 terrorist attacks, one on the former prime minister and one on the current one. The former being successful, and the Shinzo Abe, I think his name is, and he was the most pro-Russian figure in Japanese politics, from what I understand. Can you speak to Japan being hemmed in, like you said in our earlier talk, a bit about, you know, being told to cool down their relationship with Russia, basically? Do you think that is what's going on here?
Well, Abe represented a very typical old school politician who he was not a technocrat. He was not into doing things for some Malthusian ethic or any. You know, he was a businessman. He had tons of contacts in the business community, and he saw an advantage to working with Russia, which created a very big space conducive to development and investment in Russia's Far East and Arctic Siberian regions. You know, Power of Siberia 1 and 2 are 2 gigantic projects. There's a lot of Russian natural gas, oil, and other minerals that have been made. There's a high government-sponsored policy to really facilitate investments from the international business community into that region. India, very much on board. And Japan has a lot of companies that Abe had helped to broker deals with Russian counterparts to integrate with, or help them develop a lot of those gas fields, including in some cases with Chinese firms too. So again, creating synergy on the economic level between China and Japan on points of mutual development. And Abe was, by all intents and purposes, he had like over 20 meetings with Putin over the years. They got along really, really quite well. So I think it was understood why he was a disruptive force from the Pacific global NATO quad agenda of using Japan as a platform for war with Russia and China on the Pacific side, because he was just working to create harmony in many ways, even though he would often use a very belligerent language to appease either his more fanatic support base at home or his, the power brokers he had to navigate with representing the Davos, U.S. military side of things. So, I mean, he was taken out, and we saw that that was certainly a message. Another message, another sign of the fight between the sane part of the Japanese intelligentsia was covered by Nikkei Asia, a Japanese-based economics and geopolitical magazine, which is a pretty useful magazine to subscribe to if people are able to. They're not pro-China at all, but they're useful. And this was the first time that you had a trilateral commission meeting which permitted journalists, specifically 3 journalists from Nikkei Asia, to attend. And what they wrote about after attending and what they showcased was a major fight. And this is in November 2022, whereby the American delegation was basically trying to speak to the elites of Japan about the need to cut China off of the entire Pacific community, basically, and the Japanese representatives, especially of business, were pretty much saying, we're not going to go along with this. We're not going to be your vassals. We can't just pretend that China doesn't exist as we're talking about all of the different plans that we've got for the Pacific. We're cutting China. We don't even have a Chinese representative here at all, obviously. And so this was public, and it again showed that there is definitely a desire not to be induced to commit suicide. And Kishida, who's a weaker man than Abe was, but despite that, still showed a little bit of gumption, and perhaps with the help of figures within the business community, I think, who are playing a bigger role than people realize, including with the Macron visit to China. That wasn't Macron. That was the business community of Airbus, of Total, who still have clout and are not subjected to the bureaucratic strictures of Brussels. All that to say, he did agree to ignore U.S. and Brussels mandates to not pay more than a certain limited cap for Russian gas, which he still agreed to work with Russia on a gas deal, and a lot more too. So there was an attempt to, I think, kill him using a device that, I don't think it exploded. I'm not too sure. Anyway, there was something thrown at him just the other day, which his security detail was pretty on point.
The Sakhalin pipeline, I think it's called. It's about 20, 30, 40 miles, something like that, of underwater that needs to be finished in order to connect Russia to Japan and supply them with eternal Russian gas, which would not be something that the UK, US, etc. alliance would enjoy. Let's get into the technicalities of Russia being unprovoked. We all know Russia was unprovoked in this invasion, quote unquote, of Ukraine. How do you feel about Russia being unprovoked? And then you can lead into the bombing of the Nord Stream pipeline by Ukrainian affiliated groups, now that we know that it's all public. And I'll play a little animation in the background thanks to Chinese TV for the animation. Tell us about Russia being unprovoked. For 8 years. Comedy show.
I mean, I almost feel like preaching to the choir right now. I'm sure everybody, if they're watching this program, they're probably not
You don't know. We could have beat the algorithm, and something could have been suggested to somebody who doesn't know that Russia is unprovoked.
Who's the CNN addict? Well, first of all, let me ask you this: what are we playing there? Because the thumbnail is so small, I can barely make it. I can see Russia there. I can
hold
see
on. Let me see if I do this. Let me see if I do. We're doing. It's a Chinese. One second. It's a Chinese thing of.
Oh, there it is. Yeah.
That way you can see it, and the audience can see it. But basically, it's a Chinese summary of the facts known about with an animation about the Nord Stream bombing.
No, I never saw that one.
I'll send it along to you later when we're done. But let me put you back here. And let's tell me about your opinion about Russia being unprovoked, considering you were talking about the Albion.
Russia, I mean, everybody's seen the images, unless the logarithm might have failed, and you're a CNN watcher who's just listening to this now, at which point you probably already stopped watching 15 minutes ago. But anyway, let's say this hypothetical being exists. So we've all seen the images of the U.S. military bases, the NATO bases specifically around Russia's perimeter, saying who put Russia so close to our bases. They obviously want to take over the world. Similar images have been made for China as well. 100,000 U.S. troops in China's perimeter, right? NATO is a giant buildup that they've expanded since the 90s after the promise to not encroach one more inch upon Russia's perimeter was betrayed. And indeed, we all saw what was done to the bombing of Bosnia, the Balkanization process. All of this was done with the help also of Soros money on the other hand, preparing to set up new types of bureaucratic regimes in former Soviet space countries that would then be more compatible with being absorbed by the World Trade Organization, the IMF, and also to absorb them on a bureaucratic level into NATO. So this was the National Endowment for Democracy, openly a CIA front group. The former interim leader of the NED admitted so, pretty much saying everything that we do today was done covertly by the CIA 20 years earlier, and he said this in 1991. So, you got this multi-headed hydra that's been in play, especially since the 90s, going on hyperdrive to create a situation of basically that move NATO from having 16 members before 92 all the way up to having nearly 30 members today. If Finland joined, actually now that Finland's joined, it's 30. The idea is to not stop at 30 or even 40. They want to have a global NATO, right? So a one world police for the world, run by systems that would not be beholden to any government or people of the world. That's the ideal. This
crazy conspiracy theorist.
That's me.
Rumors.
Yep. So you had this going to play under Victoria Nuland being an assistant to Dick Cheney. Well, first an assistant to Strobe Talbot, another Rhodes Scholar who worked with Bill Clinton, a Rhodes Scholar back in the 90s, who oversaw things like perestroika, the cutting up of Russia, the creating of that Russian little mini nouveau-riche oligarchy that we talked about. That was there, bringing in Davos under people like Yegor Gaidar and his crew of modernizers, again receiving a lot of Soros money. That was the 90s. And then Victoria Nuland, who worked for Strobe Talbot, ended up going on to become the assistant for Dick Cheney when the neocons took over, and then quickly was appointed to become the representative for NATO in 2003, 4, 5, where she oversaw effectively the Western regime change in Ukraine and Georgia first. Again, a Soros technocratic revolution. And also Kyrgyzstan also had their own thing in 2005 under their own revolution, another foreign-directed thing. And then you had the Arab Spring, obviously. That was another expansion of the same Western-funded regime change operation that disrupted governments that were being a little bit too nationalistic, like Gaddafi, like President Bashir or Mubarak, who the three were working with, to have a Libya, Sudanese, Egypt alliance for development outside of the IMF to build big projects. So that had to be stopped, and they did that the way they always do, with weaponized mobs of disenfranchised, alienated youth who don't know how they're being manipulated and don't mind getting a $50 paycheck to go to a protest, and then a few of them get a $300 paycheck to throw a Molotov cocktail, and before you know it, the thing goes on fire. So Russia and China were looking at this thing growing.
Mostly peaceful protests.
Yeah. And these things start peacefully generally, but you got the provocateurs, sent in to kill protesters and police agents, and they did that in Libya. They did it in Syria. They did it all over the place. They often use some radical fascists, like neo-Nazi militants in the case of Ukraine, or ISIS militants called freedom fighters in the case of Libya or Syria. In Libya, it was the Libyan Islamic Fighters Group, which is the Al-Qaeda branch in Libya, or the Libyan Shield. Another Al-Qaeda in Libya. Syria had their own thing. Mali, same thing, being targeted. Sudan is also being destabilized once again today. All that to say.
Yeah, you mentioned Sudan. I was just gonna ask. Can you clue us in a little bit on what's going on in Sudan? What's your take, and what you think?
I'm gonna reserve. I'm gonna keep it general for now, because I'm gonna do a deeper dive, but I want to get my facts straight before I go into detail. But what I could say is Sudan is a high trophy target. Susan Rice, Rhodes Scholar, by the way, was in charge in 2009 under Obama for carving up Sudan into a north and south for better balkanization.
Yeah, let's not forget that it just recently became North and South Sudan.
The world's youngest. One Muslim.
Yeah. And one with oil, one with less oil.
Yeah, Sudan has, exactly, and the south has a lot of oil. But Sudan is from a geopolitical Mackinder perspective, Sudan is a high value area. It's really close to it's a border region with both Egypt and with Ethiopia. It's a Nile country. There were, throughout the 80s, efforts to prevent Sudanese development. There's something called the Jungle Canal, which is 80% finished with the help of a big German firm back in the 80s to build a canal connecting the White and Blue Nile, which would have tripled food productivity, flood control, everything. It would have been huge job creation driver, and would have created a lot of hydroelectricity as well. And it was sabotaged by a Western instigated civil war back in the 80s. To this very day, this giant machine that carved out the canal is still just sitting collecting. It's just rusting today. The Germans had to just get out because the climate became too unfriendly to investment. And that's been what they did to Libya when Libya was building the Great Man-Made Water Project funded by the Libyan dinar. That was bombed. The first thing bombed by NATO was that, before they started bombing other government infrastructure. So again, Susan Rice's assignment was balkanize Sudan, partially justify this balkanization by putting President Bashir on the International Criminal Court wanted list. That sort of was supposed to delegitimize him as a leader, kind of like what they tried to do to Putin, or earlier on Milosevic. And that would then justify again more of this chaos. Obviously, it didn't work with Putin at all, and that was demonstrated by the fact that 40 African countries all met with their Russian counterparts at the African-Russian Summit in March 20th, the day after the ICC, which is a Soros-funded court, by the way. Soros-funded and Western CIA-sponsored court. So it's a fake court with no jurisdiction, including inside of the USA itself. They put out this warrant on Putin, and despite that, 40 African governments still met with Russia at this summit and signed amazing business deals on energy, military, everything you could imagine. Really good stuff. So it showed that they don't have the type of intellectual power that they had a decade ago. So yeah, all of these things. And Sudan has been generally friendly. Like, they signed a deal with Russia for Russia to have a military base at the port of Sudan on the Red Sea on March 23rd. That's a big deal. China also has a variety of military deals with Russia, with countries like Ethiopia, which is one of the most independent countries of Africa that have gone very far to build the biggest hydroelectric dam on the African continent, called the Great Man-Made Renaissance Dam. No, sorry, the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, the GERD. China's helping build high-speed rail networks that could integrate into Kenya and into Sudan. There's deals that have been signed to extend that rail into Sudan, that could also extend into Egypt, where deals have been signed with the Egyptian government to do the same. And this is all part of a broader tapestry anyone can see by going to the Africa 2063 website under the African Union, headquartered in Addis Ababa, which calls for 9 new rail corridors, some high speed, going 6 east-west, connecting the continent with common gauge rail. In the case of the current one, that would go from Djibouti on the port next to the port of Sudan, all the way up to the west coast, through connecting 10 landlocked countries in the middle of Africa with development corridors. That's underway. Like that's a thing that they're talking about. There would be 3 other east-west corridors. No, sorry, 6 east-west corridors under their agenda, and 3 north-south corridors from the tip of South Africa all the way to Egypt, with several other lines, and 56,000 kilometers of highways planned as well as part of this. But it requires the Chinese stable banking power to make this happen financially, which is working. And Russia, they've got $200 billion of trade between Africa and China. Russia is smaller. It's about $23 billion of trade, but that's going to grow. And Russia's helping also. Their specialization is intelligence and military. China's not as good at that stuff. Russia needs to build up its banking, its sovereign banking powers the way China has. But they all have talents that they're offering to the continent and to the world, which are playing together really quite nicely. And again, Sudan, the arsonists of the West want to light Sudan on fire because it's a strategic node within the great game. You say
Russian military, and we're talking about Africa. I can't help myself but ask you about Wagner and kicking out the French colonialists. What's your take on French-speaking Africans saying on aime Poutine?
It's refreshing, eh? No, I don't know about the details, so I'm not going to go into
generally
some of the details about what's
like
going
your
on.
reaction of the news. Like when you saw that on TV, how did it make you feel?
Yeah, and then also keep in mind you have Tunisia's president too saying like we're not going to be peons for the IMF. We're going to go at this with our own development model. And people in France Afrique, the former abused colonies, or who have been continuously colonies, even after de Gaulle decolonized French Africa, the corporations never left. And after de Gaulle was ousted, they became more virulent than ever, working with the CIA and MI6. But the reason why all of these African leaders all of a sudden are finding some serious backbone to say publicly what they'd formerly only said in private is largely because, again, there's a new game in town. They've been given a lot of actual vital military support on a variety of levels by Russia. As you pointed out, the Wagner Group is playing a very big role. A lot of this stuff we're not privy to, but you see the effects of it coming out in surprising ways. And also, like I said, both I always speak of Russia and China together when I speak about Eurasia and Africa. They're both sort of playing a game, offering again those talents together, providing a new type of way of thinking about investment. And frankly, the U.S. could work with Africa if we choose, and the broader West could get their heads out of their asses, sober up, and actually see this is a wonderful opportunity to do business. You can make hundreds of billions of dollars of tangible business investments by simply building projects that were like, look, SNC-Lavalin, right? In Libya's big water project that would have taken water from under the Sahara, moved it north, and made abundant food growing regions real, was made possible through a Canadian construction firm called SNC-Lavalin. They knew that was good business. They were going to make huge money. So Caterpillar, a lot of these American construction firms, the oil and natural gas firms, are being targeted for destruction by the technocrats controlling Washington. They have no role to play in a depopulated slave society of 1 billion, people eating bugs and using somehow, bikes and maybe electric cars if you're really rich, and windmills. There's no role to play for Chevron or
self-driving.
Or
you forgot self-driving.
Yeah. So they would benefit. The people would benefit. It would be Africa's going to be one of the biggest consumer markets by 2050. If the world doesn't blow up, 60% of the population of Africa is going to be under the age of 28 years old by 2055. That's a huge. If they've got that amount of young people with income because, you know, there's now going to be an economy that's viable there. China is helping them build manufacturing factories that we never permitted in the West. That's going to be a big consumer base that could feasibly justify a market for goods that could be built in America, built in Canada. You know, we could rehabilitate the factories that we shut down over 60 years. We could rehabilitate them and start making things that put Americans and Canadians to work doing useful things again. If I'm just saying this,
if there was willpower,
putting it out there,
yeah, crazy idea. Yeah. Nuts. I wanted to get a little bit back onto the current, let's say, topic of Ukraine, because it is something that is world changing, and it's been going on for over a year now. The special military operation has. The war and the conflict, let's say, has been going on for 8 years. What is your take on Russia's pace in this special military operation, and the approach to, you know, versus like a NATO bombing campaign? Shock and awe, terror, and merciful angel, and all that wonderful stuff.
Yeah. Well, I've always appreciated Andrei Martinov's general assessment. I think he's one of the more competent analysts of this sort of thing. I think that for those, you know, Western complainers who are saying how Russia is incompetent, or I shouldn't even call them complainers. Let's call them self-congratulating self-flatterers, talking about how incompetent Russia is because they didn't do a shock and awe the way we did to Afghanistan that allowed us to win that war in like a few months. No, Russia is not surprised. They're first of all, they're taking significantly fewer losses, I think by a factor. Some people say 1 in 7. I've seen other assessments that it's more like 1 in 12, 12 Ukrainians for every one. So their losses are significantly lower. They never wanted to destroy Ukraine. You know, Ukraine is a country that Russia has always anticipated would be part of a community of a family of nations working together on things that would benefit the people of both sides. You know, there's a lot of Ukrainians, especially in the East, but also in the West, who have family in Russia, and they're just being manipulated. The Western Ukrainians are totally being manipulated right now. But the Russians didn't want to destroy the infrastructure or the people. So they've been relatively systematic and patient and careful going about their campaign. They've also, I think, sort of used an old Russian military tactic of feigning a little bit of incompetence now and again. I think that there's a little bit of mind fuck that's been sort of done as well, to give off an image that you're weaker than you are in order to surprise your enemy. So at different times, you know,
like the whole ammo Prigozhin fiasco.
That's exactly what I was thinking about. Yeah. Yeah. All that to say, there's also a quality where Russia and China, and also to an increasing degree India and Iran, are patiently biding their time as the Western system goes through its natural decay and meltdown. It will be replaced, and the new system that they are putting online is a viable system that will float on a security and economic level. So there's a certain quality of just patience, and Russia has, I think, absorbed a lot of the energy militarily that was formerly put into Afghanistan. I mean, they had all of this, like, you know, productive power building weapons that had been justified to prop up the military industrial complex over 20 years of war in the Middle East, specifically in Afghanistan. That was now redirected into Ukraine and then some.
Interesting way of looking at it. Now that you mention it, it makes me wonder if the Russians were like watching the whole 20 years of Afghanistan and the Middle East of the U.S. and just doing the math of how much can the West actually produce, and then creating the special military operation for the demilitarization of the West. Do you think that's a possibility?
It's sort of happening. Like the promises to supply weaponry has far exceeded now the pace at which they can even produce the weapons that they're promising. So a lot of IOUs have been given to Ukraine. Yeah, maybe there does seem to be something systematic about all of this, and the West has been drunk off of their own hubris for a long time, not thinking self-critically about their own incompetence. And I think that Russia and China, who have been very active-minded over decades now, thinking about the time to strike. They've been thinking about when do they go public with this new system, which is now happening. We now finally see the effects of years and years of backdoor, back-channel diplomacy and preparations, which is catching some people off guard, when all of a sudden the Saudi and Iranian delegation just show up in Beijing. It's not like that was planned. This is not the consequence of a few weeks of labor. This is many, many years of work to organize the Saudis and the Iranians to do this together at the same time. A lot of things are moving fast. Brazil, too. Lula da Silva, he's in a very hostile environment in Brazil. And he had to play the game of going with the momentum of insanity in many ways and accommodating certain very bad interests who have a huge control over the culture, the economy of Brazil, and stay alive on the one hand after he's just gotten out of jail, and when the moment of ripeness comes to pluck it, which is what he did now, going to Beijing and doing and saying what he did over the past few weeks. That's a surprise for many people. But again, there's years and years of this planning. So yeah, did Russia take note of the U.S. techniques of carrying out asymmetric war in Afghanistan? Yeah, for sure. Are they making the same mistakes as the Russians did in the first Afghan gambit back in the 80s? No, they're not. I think they're a lot wiser to the enemy. The enemy's a lot weaker than it was in the 80s too. And when I say the enemy, I mean the governing financier oligarchy, not the nations of Europe or North America. I specifically mean the governing financier oligarchy of death cultists. That's all I'm talking about here. It has a lot less to work with today. People are a lot less charmed by the
Empire of Lies. I think some random guy referred to it as some random guy, Putler.
Yes,
the evil
it's an
Putler.
Apt name. Whoever that guy was who said that was pretty smart.
I wanted to ask you a serious conspiracy theory question. Have you heard recently one of the Ukrainian officials saying that the Russians are using weather modification technology?
Yeah, but I didn't look into it. I don't know.
All right. I've got a clip here from Military Summary, and he talks about it. Let's just listen to it and see what he says.
Syrsk reported that they can't start offensive operation in the vicinity of this area because the weather is very bad. It's like rainy almost every day. And Syrsk reported to Zelensky that there has been never such kind of weather in this region, maybe since the beginning of the entire Earth or something like this, since the beginning of the years. So the weather is very bad. And he also suggested and told Zelensky, according to this source, that the Russians started using their secret climate weapon. And the Russians who are making the weather so bad and making the rains all over the time in this area. And this.
Now, we talked about this with one of our guests earlier, who's a military historian, and just days before this news came out. And he thought I was crazy for suggesting something like that. And you might be aware that, as far back as Vietnam, the technology to, make the monsoons longer, come earlier, and stay for longer has existed. I don't know if you're aware of that. And it's declassified now. So do you think that...
Yeah, I just don't know. I guess I don't know how effective the technology was in application, because I know that you're right. Like, I've seen some of these declassified reports as well from the 60s going through weather modification as a tool of warfare. I don't know about, again, what somebody says they're experimenting with and what they're actually able to do. It hasn't been proven to me that they've been able to there's white papers, for example, on research into artificial intelligence to replace humanity, basically, right? They are very, very far. I don't think they're even ever going to be there as far as being able to have computer AI that can actually do what they say it can do. I think largely it's there as a head fuck as far as that particular technology to basically make a lot of people kind of impotent and dumb about what's really going on. As far as from what I know, yes, there's human beings can use tech to influence the weather, and we see this with the work on ionospheric interventions, where you can use certain antennas that have certain resonances that shoot that frequencies up into the ionosphere, and that
like
can
playing a harp,
charge
like playing a harp.
Yeah, playing the harp. But there's a lot of other. Abu Dhabi has also built up certain things. Israel's built certain. That's Australia, true. Mexico, and it can be both for good or for bad. You know, like we've seen in some cases within Mexico. Sergei Pulinets, a very important Russian scientist, has done work for the Mexican government over the years, taking these systems of antennas from the coast, the ocean coast, into a desert region in the north, in order to create a charge whereby the ionosphere would induce a gradient of charges, causing the atmospheric vapor rivers, because 50% of the fresh water on the earth is constantly locked up in these dynamic vapor rivers that are very organized. It's not like homogeneous in the in the atmosphere, and their contour, their trajectory is being shaped by the ionosphere, and there is a charge within the water molecules themselves that itself has something to do with cosmic radiation seeding cloud covering, which we don't have to go into. But all that to say, the problem is that most of this water, fresh water, it evaporates from the ocean, leaving the salts, and then it rains down onto the ocean and just cycles over the ocean, not participating in biomass. So what Sergei Pulinets and the better scientists have done is they figured out a way to move some of those atmospheric rivers over the dry regions that would induce a rainfall. And there's been spectacular results of 30 to 80% increased rainfall that have produced a lot of food abundance. Now, that obviously is not the effect that you would want to get if you're an imperialist depopulation fanatic. You don't want more food abundance. You would want to use that tech to create more to destroy food crops, maybe create more floods. So I think this tech does exist. A lot of it's off the radar for most people. Some of it's classified. And that is part of what people should be thinking about when they're thinking about real-time, real-world warfare. Is it capable of inducing, because I think some people have gotten a sense of this tech, and they tend to get a little irresponsible, which is where I get a little apprehensive with how I talk about it, because they're like, well, that's everything, every weather phenomenon, from an earthquake to a hurricane to a tsunami, everything is man-made. Nothing is natural. And then you get that polarized other extreme that I try to intervene on a little bit to temper people down, because I've never seen any evidence that this tech can actually induce something of the magnitude required of a major earthquake, like in Turkey or Syria or in Japan in 2011.
Some Turkish parliament members think so. Some Turkish parliament members think so. I don't know if you caught that.
Yeah, they do. They do. Yeah, but parliamentarians can be as dumb as your average, cheesecake employee. The point is not to insult cheesecake employees, but I'm just saying, like, it's nothing special. It's not like they have necessarily special intel. They read the same global research magazine sometimes as we do.
Exactly.
And all that to say, there has been extreme weather for a long time, and I know Zelensky has said, global warming is being advanced because of Putin's war in Ukraine that's causing more soot, more explosions and microparticles to go into the atmosphere that's creating global heating for the greenhouse effect. So everybody, it gets messy. Is Russia using tech to maybe make the weather poorer for the Ukrainians? Yeah, maybe it is. Maybe they are. It would not surprise me.
All right. We've been going for almost an hour. This is our second talk today. Matt, thank you for coming on. Do you have anything you'd like to point out to our viewers that we might not have covered, or somewhere where you'd like to send them to find you more regularly?
Oh, the plug. Yeah, the plug. I like that. Thank you. Yes. They could go to... So if people want to dig a little bit more into some of I've touched on some matters of deeper history and conspiracy. And if people want to test out if what I'm saying is backed up by rigorous facts and research, I encourage folks to read my books. Clash of the Two Americas, Volume 1 to 4, and Untold History of Canada, 1 to 4, as well as Breaking Free of Anti-China Psyops, a new special report, which will soon be translated into Japanese next month and available in Japanese bookstores. Going through how we're being played psychologically against China by intelligence agencies masquerading as human rights organizations or the media. So that's all available on CanadianPatriot.org. And otherwise, my Substack is something that people could subscribe to for the free or paid upgrade versions. That's sort of my bread and butter these days. So if they want to get either one, there's a lot of free material. They can go to matthewehret.substack.com and sign up there. And I usually put out something every couple of days.
We'll leave links in the description. You'll send all those along as soon as we're done.
Yes,
Matt, again, thank you for stopping by. It's been excellent. We'll be talking again soon, I hope. Have fun over there in Canada, Stan.
Right.
What can I say, man? What can I say?
It is what it is. It is what it is. Well, yeah, no, I mean, you're also,
land.
I mean, I hate saying that. Yeah. All right, man. Thank you very much. Till next time.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for sticking by. Like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. See you soon.